come up again and again is the issue or the problem of parole, and parole in Ohio specifically, because we're in Ohio here, and our project kind of looked at kind of the local realities of life sentencing. And so today we're hosting this panel of lovely people here to come and talk about parole and possibly parole reform initiatives in Ohio that are going on. And so I just want to introduce our panelists. I mean, this is a small group, so I think we can open it up for, like, if you have questions or if there's things you want to talk about, I'm sure we'll have plenty of time for that. But our panelists are Angela Bryant, who teaches at Ohio State University and teaches Inside Out classes at which prison?
SCI, Lancaster.
Chris, I don't know your last name. Howard. Chris Howard, who has been through the parole process and is going to share some of his experiences. Did you want to add something?
No.
Inside Out alumni.
Oh, and Inside Out alumni. Inside Out alum. Lorenzo, I don't know your last name, sorry. And I know you as Chris and Lorenzo. So Lorenzo's also been through the parole process in Ohio and is an Inside Out alum as well. Tiffany Smith, who's an attorney at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, and hopefully can speak a little bit on this panel to the issues particularly affecting women. And James Cronenberger, who I just had the pleasure of meeting, but I've kind of been introduced to via email, who is working on a reform proposal that will be submitted to the Ohio General Assembly. So we're hoping James can talk a little bit about that. So I would like to invite each of you to maybe just introduce maybe the things you're most interested in talking about today. I think at some point we'll open it up. I think there are a couple things we definitely should talk about, which are like the old law, new law distinctions in Ohio and how that affects people differently. But other than that, I think we should then just open it up to questions. But who would like to start? Anyone like to start?
I will.
Okay.
My name is Chris Howard, and I'm kind of going to give you some insight from the other end of the spectrum. You have people who are doing life sentences who are fighting for their lives, fighting to get out of prison, and I, on the other hand, have been given that opportunity multiple times. I'm a white male, I'm a property offender, and I'm someone that they can let out, and the public scrutiny just doesn't come with it. And so for me, the parole process has been, it's obviously not fair, right? Fair is not, I'll not use that word. It's a crazy system that overwhelmingly keeps people, minorities, keeps people with life sentences and murder convictions in prison. People who can be an asset to their society, who can be productive members of their community. And I know hundreds of them. I've met hundreds of them. And these individuals can make a difference in not only their communities, but maybe they could be, the work they do could be an inspiration for others. It has been for me. I'm sitting here today as a free man. I'm on parole. But whether or not, I obviously, I just did 19 years. And that's quite a stretch. I got out February 1st. So it's been a few short months. But in my case, this is my 12th term of incarceration. And the parole lady said it herself. She said, "What's any different this time than the other 11 previous terms?" And I said, "Well, I'm 47 years old now, so which is really the only difference." gave me a parole, and we were discussing earlier, my supervision, stipulations while on parole, and a high-risk offender doesn't get any higher than me, and I now only report once every 3 months. Because in their eyes, they see someone who, you know, if he messes up, he's gonna break into something, he's gonna steal something, right? But you have individuals, like I said, who are, and I can sit here and rip off several names off the top of my head, and I'm sure there are hundreds of others that I don't know where there are. To keep it simple, these individuals deserve to be released, you know. Ohio uses, for those of you who are not familiar with the parole system, they have certain standards they have to meet before they can let them out. And one of them is something that's never going to change. That's the nature of the offense. You kill someone in Ohio, the nature of that offense is never ever going to change. But they continue to use this against these individuals. You know, you can't unkill someone, right? I mean, I'm not sure what they're looking for. I'm not sure what that standard entails, because it's just something that can't be undone. And in my situation, don't get me wrong, I'm glad I'm free. I'm not asking to be returned to prison, but simply put, I'm not the most worthy candidate, so there are way more worthy individuals. But I'm simply not one of them. You know? So from my perspective, I've been given opportunities that they'll never see. These individuals are so distraught, they don't even go to the world anymore. That's a guaranteed block. That's guaranteed time. They're saying, we're tired of y'all playing with our lives. Give us the time. These individuals have lost all hope in a failed system. We can all agree it's a failed system. So, I sit here today, thankful that I have an opportunity. You know, but I'm saddened by a system that just doesn't give worthy individuals the opportunity, you know. I'm not suggesting that everybody is worthy. Everybody who has a life sentence is worthy. Some people don't value human life, but there are individuals who they've been huge for me personally. They're all lifers. Each and every one of them. So you put yourself in their shoes. How do you make an individual? How do you make an individual who 30 years, who has no disciplinary points, who has a bachelor's degree, who not only walks the walk, talks the talk, he walks the walk, all right? How do you tell him no after 30 years? He made a terrible mistake. These individuals, they deserve a chance. I'm here now because of one. So from my perspective, something's got to change. They sensationalize murder convictions. And I'm not trying to undermine the act of killing someone. It's a terrible act. There is no worse act to be committed, right? So, from my perspective, I mean, the majority of these individuals wish that they would just put them down like a lame dog, you know? And I've heard that on multiple occasions. Why would they continue to toy with their lives, you know? And it's easy guys lose hope. You know? I won't use his name, but one individual, he's been in the parole board 8 times and has never had a conduct report. He's did over 35 years, has a bachelor's degree, is involved in everything you could ever do, and spends his own money on inmate groups, organizing. He needs to be on the street. So, I'll leave it at that.
I want to speak on lifers because I was a lifer. I got sentenced to 15 years of life when I was 18 years old for a crime I didn't commit, but that's besides the point. I saw the parole board 5 times before I was eventually released. I have 4 co-defendants who are all still incarcerated, and many of them had better institutional records than me, better education than me, and they're still getting denied parole. I've been out for 3 years. I haven't been in any trouble. I try to lead a life that is righteous, and not only because I don't want to go back to prison, but because that's the person I am. I'm not the same person I was when I was 18 years old. I was a criminal. I didn't commit the crime, but I belonged in prison. And so many people are going up for parole, and they don't have any hope because, like he said, all they tell you is due to the serious nature of the crime. That's the reason it's stamped, due to the serious nature of the crime. You have no other explanation of what do I need to do to get out? What do I need to change? And what they don't tell you is in a lot of cases, which I found out after I was eventually released, was they look at your community support, they look at your jobs available. Well, after being locked up for so many years, 30, 35, 40 years, you don't have any more community support. Your family members have died, your friends have gone, lived their own, got married, they have kids. They don't have time for you. I mean, that's just the way life is. And I don't think it's right to tell somebody due to the serious nature of the crime. We don't feel like it's in the best public interest of society for us to release you. Well, the crime's never gonna change. If you're a dangerous person 25 years from now, you're gonna be a dangerous, probably even more dangerous person 40 years from now, because what are you gonna do when you get out? I mean, you have no community support. Nobody's gonna wanna give you a job because you have no job history, you have 0 credit. And like he said, a lot of people most of the lifers in prison are the ones that keep people out of trouble because they've learned their lesson. They've been locked up for so long. They've matured. They no longer desire to be a criminal. And it's just they're the ones that run the programming in prisons. They mediate problems between other prisoners. Like, these people are leaders, and out in society, I know so many people out in society who are lifers who did a long time, who are leaders in the community. They run drug rehab programs. They run their own nonprofit organizations helping underprivileged youth. I mean, it's ridiculous to say that due to the serious nature of your crime, we're not letting you go without giving you hope for the future. And I never got to the point where I felt like I wasn't going to go to the parole board, just let them do what they wanted to do, because I feel like if you truly change, then nothing anybody else can say to you is going to change that mindset. Whether it's 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, a changed person is a changed person. I just think something needs to be done. All 4 of my co-defendants, they won't be eligible for parole until after I'm already off of parole. That's ridiculous. 2 of my co-defendants were juveniles, 15 and 17 years old when they were convicted. And in a lot of cases, there's really not a lot of evidence to convict some of these people, but the parole board doesn't play jury. That's what they say. We don't play judge and jury. We're here to determine whether you're suitable for release to society. But these are just everyday individuals like us. So if they're in a bad mood and you go up in front of them and they had a bad day, they're not going to let you out. It's just the way it is. And I think there needs to be more of a set standard for why you're releasing somebody and why you're not releasing somebody.
So on that, I'd like to give you a little background. In the late 80s, early 90s, when Governor Celeste, when he was the governor of Ohio, parole hearings, the expectation was if you were continued, if you were denied parole, you would be given 2 to 3 years, and you'd be given the expectations of what you were supposed to do in order to be able to get out. After Governor Celeste, we had Governor Vojanovic, whose family had a construction business that built prisons and jails. And he, under him, he changed the laws. So continuation by the parole board could be up to 15 years. They can actually do it to the max if you have a maximum sentence. And they changed it to this, what they do now. So this is a parole board decision. There's not a lot written on there. There's some months, but like they said, you just check this box. There's a substantial reason to believe that due to the serious nature of the crime, the release of the inmate into society would create undue risk to public safety, or that due to the serious nature of the crime, the release of the inmate would not further the interest of justice or be consistent with the welfare and security of society. They don't have to say anything. They just mark that box. That doesn't give you any information. I mean, they're called the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, but they're not necessarily believing in, I guess, the rehabilitation portion of things. Under the law, they have to provide meaningful consideration. However, and there's 18 different factors they need to consider. They're not weighted, and because this is what they provide, we have no idea what they considered, if they considered anything at all. When the way the parole process works is the first hearing is called the institutional hearing, and it is the prisoner and the parole board only. So even if you have an attorney, your attorney's not permitted to be there. And anything that is provided by victims or the prosecutor or the judge or the prison is not available for either the prisoner or the attorney. So you have no idea what information they're relying on. There's a Supreme Court case, Keith, that said if the parole board relies on false information, they have to remedy that, they have to fix that. But we have no idea if they're relying on false information because we don't know what they're relying on. This is the only, maybe it's not the only, so I shouldn't say that. But our government was built on the notion that no one arm of government has 100% total control. There's oversight by other arms of the government, even the president. They're supposedly. So, sorry, not going there. But my point is, nobody has oversight to the parole board. They do what they want, they make their own rules, they do everything in secrecy, and there's no appealability. There's no way to fight that. I have clients so most of my clients are women. My project is trying to get women released from prison who are incarcerated for the deaths of their abuser. So these women have been in prison for, some of them, almost 30 years. And they keep getting denied, Recently, we had a woman, we also trained the parole board at DRC on domestic violence, hoping that would make a difference. However, after that, one of the parole board members asked my woman if she takes any responsibility for the abuse. And then they decided to...
After the training they asked her?
Yeah. And then they decided that her institutional record was so good, she must be manipulating the system. So she's been in 28 years and they flopped her for 5. They denied her, they continued her, sorry. So there needs to be, they also apparently, they apparently have this policy that the first time you're up, you're automatically continued. You're automatically denied. So my office has filed a lawsuit along with Thompson Hine against the parole board for lack of meaningful consideration, denial of records, and this first flop policy. So we'll see where that goes. Those are basically my high points on that, I guess. And there has got to be parole reform. There has to be. So that leads into you.
I actually liked what everybody had to say because that's what's in line with what we're trying to do with the proposal to our state legislators. We have a broken system. We have, I think, roughly around 50,000 locked up, maybe 3,800 sentenced before 1996, and probably close to 6,000 that has to see the parole board after the Senate Bill 2 that's doing life. And the oldest inmate, to my knowledge, is 50. He's been in for 54 years, and he's at Grafton. But we have people that's been down 20, 30, 40, 50 years that's losing their family members, losing support, are going to be too old to work and be more of a burden onto society. I would like to read a little bit of what we're trying to get accomplished with this proposal. It was written by 2 former inmates from ORW who are very legally minded, which I'm not. But we have the 7 goals that we're trying to get accomplished through getting something like this proposed is, number 1 would be immediate relief for all old law prisoners unjustly denied parole who have had no appeal process and no legal remedy in the courts. 2, establishment of an appeal process for prisoners who have met requirements for parole release yet denied parole without just cause, which is a lot of the people. Number 3, reduction in the cost of prisons in Ohio by fair and just reduction in prison population by an efficient and equal administered parole system. 4, a system of review of the functioning of the Ohio Adult Parole Board. 5, revision of the Ohio Adult Parole Board structures to ensure oversight and fair representation of the interests of the families of both victims and offenders. 6, to specify clear and equitable legal justification for parole decisions to release the offender and to limit cause for which the parole board may return a prisoner to prison with a goal towards reentry, success, and reduction in prison costs. And 7, to make available to all prisoners, regardless of the date of sentencing, release from prison and equal opportunity to release options and community control sanctions. You know, if we could get these people paroled, and there may be a handful of people that probably shouldn't be, but the majority of them should be. And just think of the money that the taxpayers who's paying for all this would save. And we have to let the people know that the state's really not paying for it, it's the taxpayers, the working class people. And if they knew where their money was going, I think they'd be pretty upset. The average cost, I believe, for an inmate right now is $28,000. I think that's about right, isn't it? And the older inmates that's been down so long that's got medical problems, it's $70,000 and above. Just think, if you go through chemotherapy or through dialysis is over $100,000 a year. And that's costing the state money, which is costing the taxpayers money, and which the taxes keep going up. So we need to get a more transparent parole process for each individual. And, you know, like these people said, is the nature of offense won't change, but people do change. And majority of the people that's been down 20, 30, 40, 50 years are not going to reoffend. If they were guilty, they've lost their killer instincts. And they say around 10% are innocent, but I believe it's a little bit more than that. And if you claim to the parole board you're innocent, they're not going to parole you. Now, we met with Andre the last 2 years, and he said, oh, that's not true. We parole people. But if you look at the records, I haven't found one that has been paroled. But then we have a former senator sitting on the board who I sat in office 4 years ago that stated all these guys should be home. But what she's doing is bringing up tickets that's 10 years old and using that against the individual because she's making around $80,000 a year. You know, the parole board salary is probably close to $1 million with all 12 parole board members minus Michael Jackson, who just got arrested for DUI or stopped for DUI and said he worked for the governor's office. But that's all I have to say for now. And also, the instructor made some copies of our proposal that is someplace out there.
Yeah. Well, just quickly, there's copies of the proposal, the legislative proposal, which is being introduced to the Ohio General Assembly one.
We're working on it. And
Okay.
to bring that up, we do have Legislative Day on the 24th of May at 1 p.m. at the Ohio State House. You walk in the front doors, walk all the way straight down the rotunda, and we'll be at the coffee shop. Don't buy the coffee, it's not very good, but that's where we're going to be meeting that day.
Do you have legislators supporting?
We have a couple of interests, but we need a Republican. We have Adam Miller, who's really on board, Charlotte Tavares, but she's term limited, Herschel Craig, who's probably going to move up to the Senate. Andrew Brenner is very wishy-washy because he promised us 6 years ago that he was going to work on a proposal or a bill to try to combine the laws, and he's still talking about it 7 years later, and nothing's been done. So we have to get people, and we have to target the Republicans. Without them, we're not going to get anything passed, and we have to show them they're going to save all this money.
So there's copies. I mean, you're welcome. I made photocopies of it. There's donuts over there too if you want donuts, and there's cups and water. But there's copies of this over there for people, and there's also some information about a ballot initiative, which maybe we can talk about before we leave today too. Angela, would you like to say something?
Well, I'm going last, so I'm going to actually change based on what they've said, what I am going to talk about, which is how through Inside Out classes, do I need?
We can just point one toward you. Yeah.
I think it was about 2014 through an Inside Out group project that the class wanted to focus on this parole issue, right?
What's Inside Out for people who might not know? Inside
Out is an international program where half are university students, half are incarcerated students. You go through a training. In Ohio, I coordinate Inside Out for the state. We're in 13 prisons. Numerous universities participate. And I've been doing it, it's my 10th year at SCI Lancaster. And in 2014, each class in my classes, all of them are in different disciplines, they all run differently, but they decide what they want to focus their kind of culminating group project on. And they wanted to look at this parole system at the time for old law offenders. And so, of course, as an educator, I had to educate myself, right? because that's not my area of expertise, and I didn't know a lot about Ohio's system. So I actually have a lot of relationships. Relationships matter in DRC. And so I went and literally did observations of full board hearings. And then started getting down in their policy documents and had lots of phone calls with actual parole board members. One of the interesting things at the time actually wasn't just that my class wanted to focus on this, but the warden at the time, who was a very innovative, risk-taking warden, those are hard to come by. She has since left, and it's, very different. And she was actually frustrated seeing men in her prison go in front of these institutional hearings that you heard them speak of, because most people are denied at the institutional level. They never make it to the next pass, right? And seeing men that she believed are restored citizens getting denied at that level. And so she wanted us to actually focus on this too and figure out what was going on. We had some luck implementing actually some findings from group projects. So in those phone calls that I had with, at the time, some of the parole board members, and of course they've turned over since then too, I didn't know the history too of why the parole board was created, and they shared with me that it was a compromise at the time when they created this monster, which was the legislation was actually demanding that victims, essentially victims' families and victims, would have the right of denial or parole, meaning that if I'm a victim of a serious crime, right, that if you were coming up, if Chris was coming up for parole, that I would be able to say, no, you're not getting out, versus some kind of what they called at the time middle ground, right? People who were trained in certain areas and could look at all of these different factors instead of the direct victim and victim's family. So that was a piece of information I didn't know, because I could tell just from my limited experience that the whole process was very much geared towards victims' families. And so I kept asking different questions until I got to this piece where I was like, oh, okay, so now even when things aren't in policy, if you understand the history of how they come to be, you can see why they end up in this slanted space. I'll tell you a couple other things that I think are really important for people to understand. Full board hearings, even though many people don't make it to that stage, are public. However, like a lot of things in our criminal justice system, they make it really challenging to be in the space. Meaning, even though there's supposed to be this public hearing, they want to know why you're there, kind of what you're representing. And in my case, they knew exactly what I was doing, and they made me sit. In fact, twice I had, there's police officers there, and twice the police asked me to move because I kept moving to the offender side because nobody's over there, okay? And on the other side, you have, the prosecutor from the county who isn't the prosecutor who prosecuted the case, right? This is 30 years removed, so they're just going off of the file that they have. You have OVS, which is Ohio Victim Services folks who represent the victims and their families. You also have a lot of kind of people who work in the system who are there for all sorts of reasons, continuing ed, they're parole officers, but it's like, if this was the space, you would have like these seats all full. And then on the offender side, rarely in my observations were there family members there. And if there were, there'd be like 2 or 3 of them to testify. And at this point, they had started providing public defenders at the full board hearing only. And so it was that person and these 2 or 3 family members. So it was like completely skewed physically. And it is very noticeable, like it's palpable in the room too, actually. And so even when I would try to shift it and say, well, I'm not like affiliated with any of this, I'm just here to observe, so why can't I? You saw it too, I don't really like to be in tight spaces. They didn't want that, okay? So the full board hearing, I did learn a lot. I have since, we focused on this issue a lot, and actually I have a think tank now at SCI who is trying to bring an actual project to fruition around parole. And we've decided that actually some of what we're getting bogged down in terms of old law, new law, is harmful to what we want to see achieved. which is reform for both. Because if you look at the numbers, they're pretty equal in terms of who goes in front of the board. And it makes up 15%, for instance, of the 50,000 folks that you talked about. So if you look, just based on the most recent numbers, the pre-SB2 folks, which are people sentenced before 96, where they were given, like Lorenzo was, you're given a plea bargain of 15 to life, told you're getting out at 15 years, right? Whereas the new law went into effect after that. And so you had 4,144 people under old law, and you have 3,605 people under new law. Take those two numbers together, and that's 7,749 people. That's 15% of our entire population stuck through this release mechanism, right? So one of the things we're looking at, because I've had conversations again with parole board members that have since shifted with the drama of the parole board member getting arrested for bribery, attempted bribery of a police official. I am wondering, by the way, since OJPC has filed a lawsuit, if you're going to do some litigation around every case that he was on, because there's been some folks now filing for clemency that he was the major naysayer of their release, given what happened with that case. And they hear this, they're hearing this a lot, right? They're hearing this like they're not letting old law folks out. And the last conversation I had before the current chair moved to, now he's in legal services, I like to talk about these criminal justice systems that remind me a lot of what the Catholic Church did in the heyday of sexual abuse, right? They move folks to different parts. They don't ever really fix the problem. If it's a problem person or a problem system, they just move them around. They do the same thing in the prison system too. And the chair that was the most recent chair said, one of the things that would be interesting is, instead of just story after story of this being the case, are we far enough, and with statistical tools we can do this, from the 96 to be able to say, who is serving more time?
Oh, I can tell.
Well, and so that's one of the things that, because here's the other gateway. In order to do any research for DRC, you have to do something that meets their needs to get through their IRB process. Okay, so it's got to be something that meets their needs. It can't just be, I want to research this because it's a great thing to research. You somehow have to meet their needs. So that's something that they want statistical information on. And then the other thing we're looking at is kind of a qualitative piece, which is how they're defining what they call this suitability for release, right? Which you heard a lot of folks talk about. And I will tell you, there's also a policy for DRC that people in prison cannot directly participate in research. Now here's great, we subjugate, by the way, people to prison to all kinds of research. And I say we, because I'm part of that culture that does that. We want them, and the prison kind of co-ops it, right? DRC co-ops with University of Cincinnati all the time to do all this research, and supposedly it's voluntary, right? But if you're being told you get pizza in prison, you're probably going to go to that meeting, right, in terms of participation. But yet, if you're in prison, you cannot conduct any research yourself. But I can subject you to as many studies as I want. So we have formed this advisory group, is what we're positioning it as. Most of the men in my group are under this system. They have served a long period of time. They are restored citizens. I would move them in my neighborhood tomorrow. And they're very interested in providing what they can to help people present legislation, because we have come to the conclusion that you need legislative changes. And we even presented, James, this piece on Tuesday, and we'd like to have more conversations. We'd like your group to come out, because there's some things that we don't necessarily agree with, or we do, or we want to be able to support it in a way, kind of like what they're doing with the ballot initiative. So if we get this to a, how do we get the people to be able to testify in support of the real change that's needed in this system. Now, I will say this too, and even though this is being recorded and I plan to show it to my think tank, I make no secrets of this, even though I have all of these great relationships. I am an abolitionist of a about a lot of things, and one of them is the parole system. And I will say the system, all of them are designed to fail. So you can't look at, like, when I think of reform, it kind of gives me this, ugh, because when you tinker with this system, it does nothing. Look at what Gary Moore has even been trying to do, and I'm going to give him some props for a second, even though I'm not completely on the same page with the Gary Moore. Everything they try to do, this is the back end of the system, right? And so any tinkering they even try to do, he's shut down prisons, you know, he has, their numbers are as high as they've ever been. And yes, you gotta affect the front end in terms of who's getting into the gateway, right? But at the same time, when you have a system of parole, you heard these two men share their stories, and I've known Lorenzo longer than I've known Chris. But you know, like when Chris told me this about how he was going on inactive status right away, I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. This system is so corrupt. A man who has done nothing, okay, didn't even do the crime he was locked up for 23 years for, just had to appeal the parole board to see his own brother, who's one of his co-defendants. That took 3 years to get through. Doesn't get to go to the status Chris is on within 2 months until, what, a year or 18 months of good behavior in the community. And here, and I'm not like trying to throw you under the bus or anything, but like here's somebody who's like a recidivator, right? Like somebody who has continuously recidivated and ended up, you said since 85, you have served he has been in the community 2 calendar years since 85. 12 numbers?
Juvenile adult.
Yeah. So he cannot get off parole early. There is no, trust me, we've been using, kind of seeing what is possible within the system for folks. I testified at Lorenzo's full board hearing, and that was an interesting, and I had students there doing field notes. That's part of our work too. An interesting experience as well in terms of the questions that they're asking and those sorts of things. Lorenzo is, by the way, somebody who has from the beginning claimed his innocence, even at a parole, and did get released. But you heard him say his 4 co-defendants are still in prison. But a lot came up at the full board hearing about the Wrongful Conviction Project, who got involved in one of his co-defendants' cases, and kind of the process in which they looked at family support and support in the community is this really bizarre space. Lorenzo's from Toledo, where he lives now, and I'm just sharing from your full board hearing some of the things that brought up. And at the time, it wasn't me. He had actually someone speak on his behalf who he had connected with through poetry 8 years before, but it also just happened to be somebody who was very well connected in the Cincinnati community. He was the former president of United Way, he was an adjunct faculty member, yada, 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 and really wanted to help him reestablish himself in Cincinnati. They had so many questions about that after they had been told numerous times on record, why do you want him to go to Toledo where we've told you he doesn't have law-abiding family support?